The screen went black. Then 3 red dots appeared. The sonar operator's breath caught in his throat. His hand hovered over the emergency alert button as the signatures sharpened, clarified, became undeniable. 3 contacts, moving fast, converging. The Combat Information Center fell silent. Not the peaceful silence of an empty room, but the suffocating quiet before a storm breaks. Someone dropped a pen. It clattered like thunder on the steel deck. Every eye fixed on the tactical display where those 3 glowing threats carved paths through the darkness, closing the distance to the USS Gerald R with mechanical precision. Russian nuclear submarines, 3 of them, already inside the net, already hunting. The most powerful aircraft carrier in the world had become prey. The next 48 hours would prove whether NATO's Atlantic fortress was real or just an expensive illusion. The North Atlantic stretched endlessly in every direction, its surface deceptively calm under gray February skies. Beneath that mirror of false peace, a dangerous game had begun. For months, intelligence analysts had tracked increased Russian naval activity, but nothing prepared the Ford Strike Group for what emerged from the depths that morning. The radar signatures appeared suddenly, professionally executed, the hallmark of crews who had done this before. 3 separate contacts operating in coordinated patterns, probing for weaknesses in America's most advanced carrier battle group. Inside the Ford's command center, Captain Sarah Chen leaned over the tactical display, her jaw set. She had trained for this scenario 100 times in simulators, but the weight of reality pressed differently. These weren't training exercises or friendly submarines playing opposition forces. These were Russian attack boats, likely Yasen class, among the quietest and most lethal platforms Moscow had ever produced. Each one carried enough firepower to cripple a destroyer. Together, they represented a coordinated threat designed to test whether NATO still possessed the reflexes and resolve that had kept the Atlantic secure for 7 decades. The mission orders from Moscow's Northern Fleet headquarters had been explicit. 3 submarines would approach the American carrier group, gather acoustic intelligence on propeller signatures, radar emissions, and maneuvering characteristics. But beyond the technical objectives lay a deeper purpose, a message written in the language of steel and silence. The Kremlin wanted to demonstrate that despite economic sanctions and international isolation, Russia could still project power into waters the West considered secure. It was a calculated provocation designed to probe American resolve at a moment when political divisions consumed Washington and isolationist voices questioned the value of transatlantic commitments. What Moscow didn't anticipate was the trap they were sailing into. The GI-UK gap, stretching from Greenland through Iceland to the United Kingdom, has served as the Atlantic's primary choke point since World War II. Beneath these cold waters lies the most sophisticated surveillance network ever constructed, a web of hydrophones, sonar arrays, and magnetic anomaly detectors that can detect a whisper from 300 miles away. Every square kilometer of seabed is mapped, cataloged, and monitored in real time. NATO calls it the Ocean Fingerprint System, and it has been quietly upgraded with artificial intelligence that can identify submarine types from acoustic signatures faster than any human operator. The moment those 3 Russian submarines crossed the invisible boundary, sensors buried in the seabed awakened. At RAF Lossiemouth in Scotland, mission crews scrambled to P-8A Poseidon aircraft. In Keflavik, Iceland, Norwegian patrol planes powered up their engines. At Northwood, England, NATO's Maritime Command lit up like mission control during a rocket launch. Within 18 minutes, the entire Allied network had synchronized into a single, unified hunting machine. The ocean that Russia hoped would conceal their approach had transformed into a cage. Lieutenant Commander James Park watched his sonar display aboard the destroyer USS Roosevelt as new contacts populated the screen. Contact bearing 270, range 42 miles, designated Sierra 1, he reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system.
Within seconds, that information flashed across the Link 16 tactical network, appearing simultaneously on displays aboard British frigates, Norwegian corvettes, and American submarines positioned along the gap. What took hours to coordinate during the Cold War now happened in milliseconds. Technology had collapsed time itself. The Russian submarines detected the shift immediately. Their sensitive hydrophones picked up the sudden increase in sonar activity, the acoustic signatures of multiple surface ships adjusting position, the telltale splashes of sonar buoys hitting the water. Inside those steel tubes, Russian commanders faced a stark realization. They had not achieved surprise. Instead, they had walked into a prepared defense that was tracking their every move. The hunters had become the hunted.
Captain First Rank Dmitry Volkov commanded the lead Russian submarine, a Yasen-class boat he had skippered for 3 years. He was a veteran of Arctic patrols and Mediterranean deployments, confident in his crew's abilities. But as NATO's response cascaded around him, doubt crept into his calculations. His orders were clear: gather intelligence and withdraw if detected. But professional pride warred with tactical prudence. Surfacing now would mean admitting failure. Continuing meant operating under conditions where the enemy held every advantage. He chose a gambit from the Cold War playbook. Prepare decoy deployment, he ordered. We'll surface one boat to draw their attention while the other two dive deep and slip through the noise. It was a classic bait and shadow maneuver, effective against analog sonar systems that relied on human operators sorting through acoustic clutter. What Volkov didn't know was that NATO no longer fought that way. The decoy submarine breached the surface with deliberate theatricality, generating massive noise as ballast tanks blew and engines revved. For 3 seconds, it would have worked beautifully in 1985. But in 2025, artificial intelligence processed the acoustic data before the water stopped churning. Advanced algorithms compared the decoy's signature against baseline readings already collected, flagged it as a distraction, and continued tracking the two submarines diving toward the thermocline layer. The entire analysis took 1.4 seconds. By the time Volkov's plan fully deployed, NATO had already compensated for it. Overhead, P-8A Poseidon aircraft established a grid pattern, dropping sonar buoys every 12 nautical miles. Each buoy transmitted active pings at varying frequencies, creating overlapping detection zones impossible to evade. The ocean turned into a three-dimensional chessboard where every move produced acoustic echoes that revealed position, depth, and speed. British Type 23 frigates activated their Type 2087 towed array sonars, trailing sensitive hydrophones that listen for the faint machinery noise every submarine generates. Norwegian patrol boats added their own sensor feeds to the network. Within 40 minutes, NATO had constructed a surveillance dome so comprehensive that the Russian submarines couldn't scratch their hulls without being heard. Deep beneath the surface, the psychological pressure mounted. Inside the Russian boats, crews operated under blackout conditions, lights dimmed to conserve battery power, conversations reduced to whispers, every movement calculated to minimize noise. The steady ping of NATO sonar reverberated through the hull like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop, a constant reminder that they were observed, tracked, and cornered. Carbon dioxide levels crept upward as scrubbers worked overtime. Officers checked their chronometers, calculating how long they could maintain this depth, this speed, this mission, before exhaustion or oxygen limitations forced a decision. On the surface, life aboard the NATO vessels continued with almost eerie normalcy. Sailors rotated through watches, ate scheduled meals, and maintained equipment according to routine. The contrast couldn't be striker. While Russian crews sweated through rising temperatures and stale air, their American and European counterparts operated from a position of technological dominance that transformed desperation into discipline. This wasn't just military superiority. It was the psychological edge that comes from knowing your systems work, your allies coordinate seamlessly, and your adversary is running out of options. Behind the tactical display, a silent participant dominated the engagement. A Virginia-class American attack submarine had positioned itself 20 nautical miles behind the Russian formation, close enough to maintain acoustic contact,
but far enough to remain undetected. Its mission wasn't to attack, it was to listen. Every propeller revolution, every course correction, every adjustment in depth was recorded by hydrophones so sensitive they could hear a wrench dropped on the deck. This data would be gold for NATO intelligence, acoustic signatures that could be used to track these exact submarines anywhere in the world's oceans. What appeared to be a military standoff was actually an intelligence harvest of incalculable strategic value.
By the 24th hour, Exhaustion began cracking Russian discipline. A sonar operator aboard the second submarine reportedly collapsed at his station after working continuously for 19 hours. Another crew member suffered an anxiety attack as the relentless sonar pings continued without pause. These weren't training exercises where you could surface and call a timeout. This was real, grinding, unforgiving pressure that tested human limits as much as machine capabilities. NATO's AI-driven systems never tired, never lost focus, never needed sleep. They simply continued processing acoustic data, adjusting tracking algorithms, and tightening the surveillance net with mechanical patience. At Northwood headquarters, analysts watched terabytes of data stream across their screens. They weren't just tracking submarines, they were building the most comprehensive acoustic profile of Russian undersea operations ever compiled. Every frequency, every vibration pattern, every operational habit was cataloged, cross-referenced, and stored in databases that would inform NATO's anti-submarine warfare doctrine for the next decade. This single encounter was teaching the alliance more about Russian submarine capabilities than 5 years of peacetime intelligence collection. The strategic value was almost beyond calculation. 48 hours into the standoff, Moscow blinked. Orders transmitted through encrypted burst communications directed all 3 submarines to abort the mission and withdraw north. The retreat was executed professionally with the disciplined precision that marked professional submariners, but everyone involved understood what it meant. Russia had entered NATO's waters with confidence and departed with humiliation. Not a single weapon had been fired, yet the defeat was total and undeniable. As the Russian submarines crossed back into international waters, NATO's tracking systems followed every meter of their withdrawal. Even in retreat, they were observed, cataloged, and analyzed. The acoustic fingerprints collected during those 48 hours would haunt Russian naval operations for years. Anytime those submarines deployed, NATO would recognize their signatures instantly. The ocean's anonymity, the submarine's greatest tactical advantage, had been stripped away. In Moscow, the Ministry of Defense issued a statement declaring the mission a successful reconnaissance operation. International media responded with skepticism bordering on mockery. Defense analysts from London to Washington characterized the incident as a strategic disaster for Russia. Not only had they failed to gather the intelligence they sought, but they had revealed the limitations of their stealth capabilities to an alliance now equipped with acoustic signatures that effectively neutered those submarines' future operational value. It was, as one British analyst acidly observed, like sending burglars to case a house only to have them leave fingerprints on every surface. The implications extended far beyond sonar ranges and acoustic databases. This encounter demonstrated that NATO's collective defense architecture still functioned under pressure, that decades of joint training translated into seamless operational coordination, and that American leadership remained effective when exercised through alliance structures rather than unilateral action. While domestic politics in Washington questioned the value of international commitments, the men and women operating those ships, aircraft, and submarines proved that transatlantic cooperation remained the West's greatest strategic advantage. For Russia, the humiliation cut deeper than tactical defeat. Their submarines, once feared as silent predators capable of threatening NATO's maritime lifelines, had been tracked with such precision that their every move was anticipated, recorded, and countered. The psychological impact on future operations would be profound. How do you execute stealth missions when your adversary has mapped your acoustic signature? How do you project power when the ocean itself has become your enemy's surveillance system? The Atlantic confrontation of 2025 marked a turning point in undersea warfare. It demonstrated that artificial intelligence, Allied cooperation, and patient information dominance had transformed naval conflict into something unrecognizable from Cold War paradigms. Victory no longer required firing weapons. It required controlling information, maintaining discipline, and orchestrating complexity across multiple platforms and nations. NATO had mastered this new form of warfare. Russia had not. The strategic ramifications rippled outward from that cold stretch of ocean. In Beijing, military planners took note of how quickly Western forces coordinated across national boundaries, how seamlessly their systems merged into a unified whole. The lesson was clear. Any future conflict in the Pacific would face similar integration, similar speed, similar precision. In Tehran and Pyongyang, defense ministries quietly recalculated their assumptions about Western military readiness. The narrative of American decline, so carefully cultivated through years of political dysfunction, had collided with operational reality. NATO's technological edge wasn't theoretical. It was demonstrated, proven, and now undeniable. Within the Pentagon, senior officers recognized something equally important. This victory hadn't come from increased defense budgets or revolutionary new weapons systems. It came from something simpler and more profound: alliance discipline, maintained through decades of joint exercises, standardized communication protocols, and the unglamorous work of ensuring that American systems could talk to Norwegian sensors and British frigates without friction. That interoperability, often dismissed as bureaucratic overhead, had proven to be the decisive advantage. Wars aren't won by the side with the best equipment. They're won by the side whose equipment works together. As the last acoustic traces of Russian submarines faded from NATO's tracking displays, analysts began the long process of extracting lessons from 48 hours of data. But one conclusion required no analysis. In an age of precision sensors and algorithmic warfare, the greatest weapon isn't stealth or firepower, it's unity. It's the ability to link sensors across thousands of miles, to trust allies with your most sensitive intelligence, and to operate as a single coordinated force rather than competing national militaries. 3 Russian submarines entered NATO waters, seeking to demonstrate Moscow's enduring naval power. Instead, they proved that the Atlantic remains what it has been for 70 years, a western lake, defended not by walls or weapons, but by an alliance bound together by shared values, integrated technology, and the simple recognition that democracies survive by standing together. That lesson, written in sonar data and acoustic signatures, echoes louder than any torpedo ever could. The ocean keeps its secrets, but this time, NATO heard them all.